Hello, everybody, and welcome to R-Rated, where today we are talking about the first episode of She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. We have finally got ourselves caught up to the most recent full series that's been airing on Disney+. And this one, interestingly, kind of reaches back really, really far into the MCU by looping back around to the Hulk. We are following a brand new character, Jennifer Walters, the cousin of Bruce Banner, who, through a series of contrivances, winds up becoming herself a Hulk. This episode pretty quickly establishes a few things about Jennifer Walters. A big one right up front is the fourth wall breaking. It's not instant, but by the end of the first scene, she speaks to the audience and kind of engages directly into the flashback that will take up about 90% of this episode. So the first episode sets up a little. I mean, at first you don't really know that it's an in medias res, I believe. The action is in the middle of the action, essentially. The bit that we come in on is her about to go off and prosecute or close a case that she's prosecuting. And we find out near the end of this scene that she is already a Hulk. And then she turns to the audience and tells us just how that happens. I'm usually never a huge fan of doing that, but it kind of works from the perspective of characters that specifically it's one thing when a character who doesn't otherwise talk to the audience kind of narrates, essentially, like in their own head or, to an invisible audience or something. But in this case, it's very similar to Deadpool, who also has fourth wall breaking powers, where she's talking directly to the audience and filling them in on how they got here. And it's an interesting episode. The pacing is a little tricky, and it's odd because it does feel more like a glorified flashback than other examples I can think of, and maybe that's just because of the short runtime. The episodes here are about 25 minutes long, which is short for most of these Disney Plus shows. So it seems like my best guess is when a Disney Plus show gets greenlit for the MCU, they don't greenlight it for a number of episodes per se. They greenlight it for an amount of time in total. And it seems like they more than likely greenlight these for essentially maybe 4 hours total of content. So 240 minutes, and how they divvy up those 240 minutes is up to the writers and the director. And, ultimately some shows you wind up with like 6 40-minute episodes, and others you wind up with 9 like 25-ish minute episodes. And I think that's what we wound up with here. So the 4-hour blocks, more or less, for each of these. So you don't feel like you get a huge amount of time to kind of get into, the meat of what's going on. And where WandaVision, for example, has the benefit of a character that we're already familiar with, and the entire point of the show being the kind of intrigue as to what's going on. In this case, we wind up with, a lot of time spent figuring out who this character is, learning about, her relationship with her brother Bruce, like how they are together, and, the origin as well of like how she got her powers. And on top of that, her starting to come to terms with her powers to the point where by the end of the first episode, she seems like she's already basically got everything together. A big point of contention in this episode during the flashbacks is the two are in Mexico so back it up a little bit, she winds up, the two of them together on a road trip, and they wind up getting into a car accident that sends them tumbling. They actually are about to get hit by a Segarran spaceship. So a little bit of a callback to Thor Ragnarok. Well, it's unclear. Segarran's kind of an interesting. So the planet in Thor Ragnarok is Segarra, but the Segarrans are also the last new army of Thanos during the battles of Infinity War and Endgame. So that can be kind of confusing. It's unclear if they are related, if it's a population that he enslaved or something else. But they go tumbling off the side. which is already kind of contrived on its own. And then as she gets out of the car, she like super gashes her arm, like to the point where I thought that the idea. So my assumption going in was like, okay, something is going to happen where she needs a blood transfusion. Like she's losing blood, and for whatever reason, they absolutely have to have Bruce do the blood transfusion. And I was like 10% right about that, because what happens is she catches her arm on like the broken door, and it like a big gash. It looks bad. It looks, and for a second there, I'm like, ooh, that could be fatal if she doesn't do something about it. They're going to have to do something here. And instead, like she has to pull Bruce out from the car because he built a kind of a suppressor of sorts that allows him to just be Bruce, not Smart Hulk as he calls it. It's not Professor Hulk, but just Smart Hulk. I guess he doesn't call it Smart Hulk. He actually kind of mocks the nickname and says that he didn't get to choose it, which is kind of a fun little nod to the way that superhero names tend to work in, you know, superhero mythos and superhero like comics and all of those things. Tony didn't pick Iron Man, and I don't think Bruce picked the Hulk, and just kind of like went from there. But regardless, he has a suppressor thing that lets him just be Bruce. It's damaged in the car accident, but not enough to have him, you know, automatically turn back to the Hulk, which, boy, that seems like a really dumb thing to build, considering as the Hulk, you are functionally invincible. Make a thing that makes it so you could arguably just die, right? So that's kind of a dumb thing. She pulls him out, and the suppressing unit is damaged, so he's quickly like losing that. He's you know, about to go back into his Hulk form. But on top of that, he's actively bleeding, which is something that he basically never does as Bruce because of the Hulk, but he winds up bleeding and dripping blood directly into Jennifer's wound, which then instantly causes her to Hulk out. Which, like, that was like 5 contrivances in a row, and it's like, guys, there were so many ways you could have written this to make at least a bit more sense. She winds up freaking out, running into the woods. She makes her way to a sports bar, and she sneaks in through the back to go use like the bathroom and clean herself up because she's been like asleep for 12 hours in the woods. And a bunch of women come in and they take care of her, and they kind of like give her some like clothes and things and throw a little makeup on her and stuff. And then she walks outside and a bunch of dudes hit on her. She gets pissed off because they won't leave her alone. And the Hulk shows up and like tackles her to like, and like brings her essentially to, he has like a secret Mexican bungalow basically, where he, I guess, spent his time between the two Avengers movies. Like this is where he was for the time between there, because after Age of Ultron, he goes into space to Segarra for 2 years, and then after that, he gets on board Thor's ship, and then it's Infinity War time, and then he goes and does the blip. So, actually, I think he spent his time there during that, between the snap and the blip, not between the Avengers movies. Now that I'm thinking about it, but regardless. So this is what he's got, like a lab. He was doing studies on himself, and now he's decided he's going to need to do studies on Jennifer as well for her own safety. At least that's that's how he's pitching it to her, is like, you don't know, you could hurt people. Is essentially like, I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about anyone around you in case you don't have full control over this. But what we find out over the course of the episode is that she's actually got a really, really firm grasp on all of this. She is immediately much stronger, it seems, than Bruce, or at the very least, like competitively, and she's able to transform at will, pretty much from the word go. She doesn't have a split personality the way the way Bruce does, or I guess a dissociated identity. So basically, she's more or less completely in control from moment one, which is an interesting twist on the character. Not the character of She-Hulk, but like interesting twist on a Hulk in general, considering Bruce, by his own admission, had to spend basically 15 years learning how to do this stuff. He is very upset over this episode because, and he's trying to hide it. He's not doing a very good job. because this was like a really taxing thing for him. You know, he's spent probably a third or more of his life trying to, you know, wrestle control of himself away from this thing, and she does it immediately. And she doesn't really take the training that he's trying to give her very seriously either. So he's very, very frustrated. And they, you know, when she tries to leave, they do eventually fight. And they ruin his bar. He made a little bar down there that him and Tony made. It was kind of a sweet little moment that they talk about where, you know, it was just a nice time that like they had together. Tony was drinking and complaining about Steve Rogers while Bruce built the bar by hand. But some things that come to mind, though, during all of this is the CG is interesting. Jennifer herself as She-Hulk, I think her CG is fine. I know that the earliest trailer and some of the stills look a little weird to folks. I think there's a certain uncanny valley to individual frames of it, but when it's animated, it looks fine. She looks perfectly fine. On the other hand, Bruce looks weird. Something about Bruce looks off, and I can't quite place it. His lips look a little bit too pink, which is distracting. And also, his eyes look weirdly huge in some shots. Like, for some reason, his eyes just look like they're both beady and large at the same time. It's kind of strange. I don't entirely know how to put it. And there's also just like, so Mark Ruffalo in general tends not to use his lips a lot when he is enunciating words, which is fine. Most people don't when they're talking, but when you're doing motion capture and you're functionally being animated, generally speaking, you're going to want to do that a little bit because they're not looking at a person's face, they're looking at an animated face, and those extra little movements help, you know, the brain to kind of latch on to what's being said and all of that. There was a point where it seemed like they had given up entirely on animating his mouth in one shot, but I watched it again, and it's animated, but the angle of the camera and the amount that his lips moved just made it look like he wasn't like moving his lips at all. And it's like, ooh, okay, all right, there's some issues here. Now, granted, Bruce does not appear to be someone who's going to show up a lot in the show. He was listed in the credits as a special guest star, so I imagine he's only going to show up here, maybe the last episode, maybe like the very last moment of the episode before that, in episode 8, who knows? But yeah, I don't know. Something about it was a little bit off. I don't mind the fact that Bruce is into yoga and balance and all of these things. It makes perfect sense that with all of the time that he spent trying to reconcile his two dissociated identities, that he would have tried to find ways to center himself and such. And I appreciate too that just the angle that it is for him too. Jennifer kind of makes fun of him for getting into like weird yoga, like spiritual stuff. And he's like, it's not spiritual, it's clinical. And kind of getting into like how, you know, meditation works on a physiological sort of level, which was interesting. I thought it was kind of a neat thing to have there. But yeah, it's an interesting, like it's essentially a slow motion montage of Bruce trying to teach Jennifer how to handle these new abilities and her just already being really good at it. And him being frustrated that both not as much that she's good at it, though that does seem to annoy him a bit as well, but also that's making her kind of a lazy student of sorts. Like she's not really taking things very seriously because she's just kind of acing the quiz, you know? And his other main, or at least what he states, it's unclear if you know, he's subconsciously, you know, being a dick or whatever, but like he's also saying that, you know, you need to learn how to do these things if you're going to be a hero. And she's like, I don't want to be a hero. She's the deputy district attorney of Los Angeles. And she's like, I don't want to be a superhero. I want my life. And he's like, you can't have your life. She's setting out to assert that, yes, she can. But the point that he winds up making is that like, there's not a lot that you can have for a life at that point. Once you become kind of a monster freak person, there's not a lot that's out there, you know, other than being a hero to constantly maintain your image and make sure that people aren't terrified of you at all moments, which is a bleak sort of outlook, to be sure. But it's an interesting kind of dynamic there where she's like, I already have a job, I have a life, I have everything situated, and I can control this, which means that I can hide it. as I need to and just live my life. But yeah, so the little denouement we get at the end of the episode is her finishing, or she's about to deliver closing arguments when a woman storms through, bursts a hole in the wall. I believe this character's named Tatiana, played by Jameela Jamil, who is fantastic in The Good Place, and it sounded like she was using an American accent. I don't know if I think she normally has a British accent. Don't quote me on that, but I thought it was just kind of, she only had, I think, literally one line, so it wasn't a whole lot to go off of, but Jennifer transforms, knocks her out cold in like a second flat, and now everybody knows that she is She-Hulk. So I'm guessing that the next episode is going to be dealing with the fallout of her public persona being revealed, essentially. Not like so public persona in the sense that not that she was a superhero or anything before, but the fact that now everybody knows that Jennifer Walters is also a Hulk. That would be my guess as to what the fallout's going to be, or rather what the focus of the next episode is going to be. It does feel like it's really whipping through any sort of origin story. The entire origin of her as a Hulk is done in one episode, and it's done as a flashback in 25 minutes, as opposed to, say, Miss Marvel, where the entire series is the origin story. 4 hours, 6 episodes, and at the end of all of that, we have a Miss Marvel. Now it's like, okay, Jennifer Walters, her powers, people know she's got them now, and we got to see what's going to happen. Now, the premise of the show is that she's going to become an attorney dealing with superhuman crimes, I guess. And that hasn't really come into play yet, though I'm sure it will, very soon, probably the next episode or two. But yeah, I don't know. I think and actually I should mention too, the one thing that I thought was a particularly interesting callback among everything else, is the Hulk clap. I don't know if it's got an official name, but the clap move that the Hulk did back in the movie The Incredible Hulk to put out the fire on the helicopter that Betty Ross and Thunderbolt Ross, Rip William Hurt, were on, saving them by doing that little clap. They do that here, where it seems like there's a bit of a difference between, so Bruce does one and it's one big concussive blast that like knocks Jennifer off her feet in a way. But then Jennifer opts, rather than one big one, because she can't quite get that force on it, she just starts clapping in general. And rather than being a big concussive blast, it's now the sound wave, like the actual sonic portion of it is like awful for the Hulk, who's just like, which itself feels like a bit of a callback to the sonic Stark tech that that General Ross was using in that movie as well. So obviously Emil Blonsky is going to be in the show as more of a callback there. I'm curious if there was any William Hurt in the show before he passed. I don't think there would have been. I don't know when this filmed, so I'm not really sure there, but yeah, so I don't know. It was an interesting introduction. It was not my favorite episode 1 by any stretch, and I would probably have given this a 6, with the exception that there's a through line, and it's such a dumb little through line, where Jennifer keeps like needling Bruce for info about Steve Rogers' love life. She's had a bet, I guess, for a while now with some of her friends that Steve Rogers joined the military effort, got frozen in ice, and then upon being unthawed, it was Avengers, Shield, Hydra attack, Avengers goes into Civil War, goes into hiding, Avengers, and then he dies or disappears. It's still unclear. We never saw him die. He just was very old, and it's not clear if he's actually dead or not. But everyone talks about him like he is dead. I think because the cover story is probably that he was lost in, that he went back in time and stayed there, or he was lost in time or something, and then he never came back. But at the very end of the episode, Jennifer is super, super drunk, and she's like, no, come on, there must have been somebody who just one time. Who said, oh, and you keep telling me, so Steve Rogers died a virgin. He's an American hero. And then Bruce, finally fed up with this, is like, Steve Rogers did not die a virgin. He was with a woman in 1943 on the USO tour. He was not a virgin. And she just like, oh, I knew it. Immediately sobers up, and he's just like, wait, what? You weren't drunk? He's like, no. And he's frustrated. And she just leans back and goes, Captain America, and then it cuts off. And I'm like, oh man, that got a legit chuckle out of me, and it felt like a nice payoff for the silly, stupid line of dialogue that had been like weaving its way through the episode. So for that alone, I'm gonna give this one a 7. It would have been a 6. But the Captain America fucks bit honestly was enough to bump it up by 1. The show has work to do. I need it to actually, like, you know, do something. Obviously, it's episode 1. They're setting things up, but it's among my lesser favorite introductions so far. And I really want to like this one. But we're going to see. We're going to see how it goes. It'll be cool to see some familiar faces or more familiar faces. It'll be cool to see some new ones. And I'm curious who her clientele is going to wind up being. I do know about the most major crossover figure in all of this. I feel like you would have to literally not have the internet to not know about that. But we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, that's kind of all I have for this one. I feel like this was a kind of a short review. It was a short episode too. But I don't know. Yeah, I guess we'll have more to talk about when there's more of substance to get into. This was more of an elongated flashback montage of sorts. So I don't have a ton to work with, but, yeah, I would love to know what you guys thought of the episode, as well as this video. I'm always working to try to make these a little bit better, trying to make sure, to have some interesting things to say, some thoughts along the way there. And obviously there's some hot button stuff with this show that I wanted to at least get into a little bit. I don't know how the CGI for the rest of the show is going to be, but at least for the start of this, this is it's not the worst. Bruce looks kind of weird, but everything else seemed fine. The two of them have a big, loud, growling, yelling fight when she tries to leave, and that was kind of a fun thing to watch. But yeah, no, that's all I got. I'm going to come back next time with the next episode, and we're going to keep moving our way through She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Catch you next time. Bye.